All right, and we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Poetry from the Field. My name is Marcelo Hernandez Castillo, your Yuba Sutter Poet Laureate. Thank you for joining us here for another edition, our monthly series here, which I invite nationally recognized poets, writers, critics, artists to talk to us. Yeah, we have the privilege of hearing a wide variety of voices. Please do check out the different events going on at YubaSutter Arts. Um, uh, this month, the coming month, both virtual and a few in-person events. Um, there is a jazz concert coming up, a bunch of other things. So check that out. The youth, the youth mariachi orchestra, if I have that right. Correct me, Shante. Um, Wanted to plug that in. So today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing a wonderful poet, critic, thinker, friend, Tess Taylor, to the program. And just a little bit about Tess Taylor. She is the author of 5 collections of poetry, the latest of which, 2 of them, are published in 2020, one of them being Last West, which was part of the Dorothea Lang Words and Pictures exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and Rift Zone from Red Hand Press, which was hailed as brilliant by the LA Times and named one of the best books of 2020 by the Boston Globe. Her other books include Misremembered World, The Forage House, and Work and Days. I usually have like I show the books. Um, I'm a little less prepared today. Yeah, there they go. Um, Tess has served as the on air poetry reviewer for NPR's All Things Considered for over a decade. And she currently sits on the faculty of the Ashland University Low Res MFA Creative Writing Program. Tess, thank you so much for joining us. It's truly such a pleasure. And I look forward to hearing you read and then talking a little bit about your work.
Marcelo, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for doing this. I learned statistics about people that are involved in art, that they're more likely to graduate from high school, that they're more likely to vote, that they're more likely to be leaders in their community. And part of what we do in art centers like the Yuba Art Center, that it's like amazing to be with you, is just have those chances to build community, goodwill, like just have conversation. And it always makes me so happy to be part of that. For me, being in art is about being in conversation in a way. So Marcelo, really happy to be here. I wanted to read some from this book, Rift Zone, which, if you can see, it's partly about California. It's partly about fault lines. It's about living on land that seems to be fracturing, maybe in more ways than one. So it's for the soil and for California. For those of you, you probably know because you're all Californians, but a rift zone is a large area of the earth in which the plates of the earth's crust are moving away from each other, forming an extensive system of fractures or faults. And the book starts with 2 quotes. One is from a little yellow book my dad used to have on the bookcase when I was growing up, The Roadside Geology of Northern California. California is the product of a prolonged head-on collision between the leading western edge of North America and the floor of the Pacific Ocean as the continent overrode the ocean basin. The details are complicated, but the broad picture is not. And the other quote is from The Government of the Tongue in an essay by the Nobel Prize winner Seamus Heaney. And he says, "In the rift between what is going to happen and whatever we would wish to happen, poetry holds attention for a space." Preface. Pocket Geology. Atop the earth's mantle, rock moving, Continents are milk skin floating on cocoa. A restless interior sweeps them along. In trenches, minerals decay. At the core, land masses digest themselves. The crust does not move in one piece, but in segments. Mostly these carry the continent with them, but sometimes continent and mantle uncouple, then blocks tilt like sidewalk on unstable ground. I wanted to read a poem about some of that unstable ground. This poem takes place at the elementary school down the block that I attended and that my son went to for a few years. And in this moment, there has just been a shooting called the Stockton Massacre. And it was really the first big gun activity at a school. And it was a year that we were promised, all of us were promised, that such a thing would never happen again. 6th grade, 1988. No one explained the reasons Dana found that spring to bring her brother's gun to school, triggers that led her to threaten to shoot you bitches. We were nubbly by the morning glories, hadn't scattered different ways. We were playing tetherball. I remember Sierra Birch's thin legs running, a shrill voice yelling, "Call the teacher." In high noon California sun, Dana's palm was shaking, her face tight with fear or anger. In dream time, big men came to cuff her, and I heard her whimper, saw her lean girl's body fall. This year I found a photograph. Dana and her friend Manon, mug for my frame. Mischievous grins split baby cheeks, ponytails bustle in the wind. It came back like a rusty fountain, a smell of chalk and 6th grade funk. We were learning fractions. That day we watched her disappear, heard the big door shut, the silence after. Decades floated over all our bodies. All the schools have drills for guns now. None of this names how it feels to look back 30 years and find this odd remainder. Bright and on the verge of life, as if we are yet unhurt. There's Dana, smiling. Since we're in the 80s, I thought I would read this poem, which includes some really important landmarks. It includes the actor Jeff Goldblum. It includes the movie Earth Girls Are Easy. And for those of you that were not around watching this movie in the 80s, I wanted to stress that what happens is that some aliens arrive on Earth and they show up, but fortunately, the problem is that they're very furry and strange looking, but fortunately they've landed in the backyard swimming pool of 2 hairdressers who get them ready to face the world. And lo and behold, under their blue fur, they're actually really handsome. So I guess we're staying in 1988. Valley Girl and Paramount, 1988. I'm 12, and for the first time ever watching Earth Girls Are Easy with Rochelle B. at the Paramount in San Francisco, in whose deco dark we flicker into the enormous San Fernando Valley as maze of split levels, freeways, turquoise pools. A pod lands. A blue alien seduces Gina Davis, the high-cheekboned hairdresser. She squeals, he is so furry and so other, but she soon reveals his nearly human beauty when she shaves his blue and alien hair. Like, oh my God, he's actually Jeff Goldblum. Wait, did they blast off to another moon? California, asteroid and star. California, futuristic planet on which the hairdressers danced and sing songs about their blondness. Because I'm blonde, I don't have to think. I talk like a baby and I never pay for drinks. Easy, blonde as plundered sunshine, because I'm blonde, BLONDE, Nazi ideal in a parched valley, little sex show song, white blonde dit song, please harass and date me song, easy. I loved it so much, like trying on my own pink training bra. Melissa Kay and I learned to lip sync it for the 4th grade talent show, jiggling our arms and legs and also pouting, I don't have to worry about getting a man if I keep this blonde and I keep these tan. Absorbing watermelon glister, the way some jellyfish or squid grow coterminous with phosphorescent cells that make them bioluminesce. We grew in symbiosis with our own fucked up desire. 'Cause I'm a blonde, don't you wish you were me? That year, I would refuse my lunch in search of bonier hips, use my hunger to propel myself towards some imaginary center, warped magnetic field that sucked as I drew nearer, amplifying its desires. I wanted what it was sex, was power, was hyped up preteen musk, potent as the American myth of newness or the bloody hills of California. I was an earth girl. I too lived in a valley. I kept reciting just a little further in the toxic playbook where I learned myself. So one of the things about the town that I grew up in that didn't get talked about very much when I was growing up there and is sort of starting to get talked about more is that it was a ground zero for Japanese internment. People settled it very quickly during World War II for the shipyards and for building kind of quick housing. And there was also, at the same time as there was this influx of workers out of the South who are kind of moving into bungalows, there was this eviction order for Japanese Americans, and also kind of under the cover of that, a land grab. I went and visited one of the houses from which some people had been sent away and which had been saved kind of for a while. And they were considering making it into a kind of monument or interpretive center for the town. But actually recently it was torn down and there's just a very tiny plaque. So this poem has words that are in it that are there but struck out. So when I do this gesture, you can imagine, do you see that there's, maybe it's hard to see. It's hard to get the camera to do it. Sorry, I don't even know. It's hard to see, but the words are there but struck out. So when I make this little gesture, it means that you can both see and not see the word at the same time. Raw notes for a poem not yet written. I walk by the Japanese ruins, gated behind cracked pavement lot, where the bare hills, a riot of poppies, frame little wild lupin, geranium, hothouse thorns. They never came back. Their white neighbor saved not all of their business. In the windows, torn rice paper, half a Shinto shrine, 60 years later, toppled where they were taken, last of those buildings, down in, oh, my town. We perch on what was done here. My best friend's grandmother, my first boyfriend's grandmother, I knew it later, they never spoke of it to me. Whiskey crates and damp mold of abandoned places. Coyote bush rattles, seems to be asking, who will they take next? When are they coming? It's blackberry season still, so I thought I'd read this poem for blackberries. And then I'm going to read a few more poems from this other book that actually Marcelo was like instrumental in helping me write. And then we can talk. Song with Wild Plum and Thorn. The morning is cold and the world is hard, but even in fog, it is still midsummer. The kids need to play and the grocery budget ticks towards nothing the way the world tips towards doomsday, and the walls in my chest will not let me breathe, and all the screens flicker and still answer nothing. So I take the children down to the bike path, and with buckets and a few blessed hours wander a corridor of weedy fruit. Blackberry, wild plum, all overhung, we leaners or gleaners, half acrobatic, lost among boughs, alone till I notice others stopping with buckets or tiffins in many languages along these tracks, picking what weeds we still hold in common as dry heat builds and fog thins. In common, in common. The thought feels strangely radical, crumb or bloom beyond loneliness. For a while I feel entirely animal, little forager hungry for fruit. Black sparkle, pale pit and thorn, weeds binding some world together. A word appears in my mind. Hold fast, hold fast. Sprout, raw volunteer. For a while it is hand to mouth and to bucket. Breathing, still here, still here. So I got, encircling my neighborhood and thinking about it, I learned that the artist, the photographer Dorothea Lang, had photographed it in the 40s during exactly those period that I was mentioning, when new bungalows were going up and when people were also being evicted at the same time. And I had not always thought that my neighborhood was very interesting. And so the idea that this artist, Dorothea Lang, had wanted to see it so beautifully really called me. And I spent some years reading her notebooks in her archive. And for those of you that don't know, Dorothea Lang photographed migrant laborers coming out of Mexico, but also the Dust Bowl in the 30s. She was photographing people kind of in transition, in transitional housing, people who were affected by the Great Depression and living in very provisional ways. And she did this partly funded by the WPA, which was that government-funded program that wove artists into the repair of the country at a very difficult time. And her work really moved me and moves me still. And I had this project where I used her notebooks and I wanted to go all the places in California that she photographed in the 1930s and just see what was there. So part of the trip, actually, I went with Marcelo, and there's this really long poem, and there's like a note to Marcelo from down in Imperial County, and Marcelo took me around to places he knew up near Marysville, in Yuba County, and it was really like that was one of those days that just was like magical for a friendship, I think. But I wanted to just read just a few poems from this, and then we can talk. So Dorothea Lang, at the end of her life, describing why she began this work, said, "I was young and faced with the question of how I was going to maintain myself on the planet. And of course, there were many things that were going on that I, in California, was not aware of." So this first poem is a collage of her notebooks, and the second poem is sort of my little note to her. Imperial Valley, 1935 and more. Road Songs, her 1935 notebook. Coachella, Calpatria, Neyland, Holtville, Calexico, El Centro, Brawley, back up 99, Edison, Tulare, Turlock, Modesto, Westland, La Loma, Marysville. Her scrawl, date palms near Mecca, a desert method. 1935, single man. You can't find any decent place unless you pay good money. What difference, what country, what state, what agency? Question, what does it mean to photograph home? 1935, families of squatters along a side road. All have house cars, get water at service station. Crops, lettuces, melons, carrots, peas, cantaloupe, potato, apricots, peaches, berries, alfalfa, beans, cherries, sugar beets. Man, how are you going to get by on just $2 a day? Cotton, 3 men, 20 cents, half a row, $2 a day, potatoes no better, man, wife, and kid, onions $1.60, hay job, 25 cents an hour. Imperial Valley, more refugees outside. 1937, man, if we had anything to go back for. 1937, Skid Row. This also is California. 2019, today's paper. Climate change affecting coffee groves of Honduras. 1937, man. I wouldn't undertake to farm this land no more. Abandoned houses, abandoned soil, the government camp, the trading center, Main Street in Marysville, cabin for rent. Graph lax number 1, note to self, get wide angle lens. February road song, I-80 toward winters. Daffodils, rolling hills, the green skin of California. Low valleys puddling silver with sky, row after row, industrial almonds fields, pale monocropped armies, exorbitant bloom, bee boxes near pesticide tanks. Along the barn door, one hummingbird, pomegranates splay under last year's walnut, rattly tarp, creek bed willows, mud and a shovel. Along the farm road, prohibida la entrada, the great fig, its crown toppled, makeshift benches in shade, so tenderly pink by I-80, the cherry straddling the barbed wire and the ditch. I'm just going to read the last sort of letter to Dorothea in this book, and then a little note that I wrote at the border, and then I have a chance to talk to Marcelo. Dear Dorothea, I wrote all year at rest stops, on roadsides, at gas stations, in sweltering dust beside the Glide Church by your old studio, beneath pesticide-sprayed walnut leaves, near the Sunsweet dryers, and so many tents. In a bungalow where lawyers defend caged children, also one summer morning when sage and sticky monkey met the soft fog off the sea, at labor camps reclaimed by crabgrass and amid evicted stoves, near rice paddies of Knight's Landing, near Esparto where sunflowers sunk into their black hulls, at Codornices Creek behind the brown shingle you came home to, I saw one yellow finch, thought again about the body, how to house the fragile human in labor, dreams, and rest. Down in Imperial County, the border is also a river, and the river is also part of the thing that is being militarized and guarded because it's the water. So it was interesting to be there and watch how carefully the water of California is guarded. The new river meets the all-American canal. If in apricot sage you weave, If in apricot dust you weave past white sage and climb over pickleweed, you'll pick out a path, some channel for motion, low and half hidden and soft between bushes. If you push in and head north in the morning, you might find one shoe, a helmet, a toothpaste tube, and riverbank footprints, dog, wildcat, deer, human, some desert morning, light prickling birdsong awake. You might startle a duck from the green river banks. Dark among willows, the sign says poison, no entrada, and in sagebrush, your cell phone can't say whether you're in the US or Mexico. And in blue shade, under the overpass, many cliff swallows dart from clay homes. In chaparral beside the slow river, you might walk for a while as the road grows distant, might feel in the silence how you're just walking, might feel for a moment how it's just earth again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tess. That was beautiful, beautiful as always. It's such a pleasure to hear you read your poems. I really, really miss the feeling of finishing a poetry reading and just hearing people just, absorb it. And so being here doesn't quite get that experience, but I hope that we can somewhat, imagine the audience absorbing and clapping right now. So thank you, Tess, so much. Every time every time I hear you read, like, I'm always taking notes, because it's so prescient and similar to, a lot of the concerns that I have about California, about the landscape, about the environment, about borders. And I had a weird experience recently that kind of, I think, grew out of uh, our time together here. When you came for research, for Last West, in Marysville, then going up to Gridley, is that being in the field, even by field I mean, like, field work, um as a way to, like, get the gears turning. And so um I recently, I think I took that to heart from that experience, because I hadn't been writing for haven't been writing poems for a minute, since my first book came out. And so I felt like I needed to do something different. And I noticed that a lot of your poems, like you say in there, writing them in gas stations, writing them as you're traveling, for research, writing them in writing notes towards that, and observations, away from the desk. And I guess I'm interested in your practice of that. Has that always kind of been the way you approach your work, is through kind of like empirical observations and being very closely attuned to your environment, and needing to be, out there, and then noticing those small nuances, and then, finding something to connect them, later back, once you gather back. But I don't know. I mean, that's a question just of your practice as a poet, a poet of the environment, and the landscape. I guess, maybe if you could talk a little bit about that.
So it's so interesting that you would ask that question, because yes, in a strange way, all of the work that I've done so far has been partly fueled by travel or research. I also have a journalism degree and have done a fair amount of, like, just being at the scene of something. I reported actually on the fall of the World Trade Center for a small architecture magazine. But, like, the discipline of just, like, having your notebook and your pencil and going and seeing what you see and what people say. And it was interesting, as a journalist, I always wanted to do these kind of sidelong stories. And they were always a little bit, like, I had to kind of find funny columns or sympathetic editors who would, like, want me to tell it slant, because a poet is always looking sideways. But as a poet, I found myself going to archives and, like, digging up historic wills, or there was a year where I wrote about farm work, but I worked on a farm for a year, and it was a really different kind of farm than we have. Well, it was more a full belly farm than, like, a big monocrop farm. It was, for those of you that know that farm that's over in, is it in Winda? Cool. Anyway, there's a farm nearby, up there. And my farm was in Massachusetts. It was like a 3-acre farm that I worked on for a year. So that was, and then the poems came out about the work. And then there's other ones where I've, like, gone to the archive and dug up these fragments. And one of the things that's been super weird about the pandemic is the poems that I'm writing now end up being these incredibly small poems. Like, one of them is to an egg, and one of them is to chard. And I'm writing some, like, odes to my backyard chickens. And I think it's been really strange to feel like I had to use what was really exactly to hand here in the small, that I couldn't, like, go to an archive. And I have this whole project piling up on this table over here. I would love to do a cool, yes, Cape Valley. Yes, Full Belly Farm. Thank you, Sue. Somebody helpfully, like, got, but but I have a whole like idea of working with some forest rangers and foresters around kind of like the fate of our trees in the forest and the moment of global warming. But it's all stacked up because I just don't know how to like do that kind of work in this moment. So it's just been funny because I was so doing that kind of work, and I didn't even realize how much I would miss it until this moment of kind of, I mean, I like my ode to the egg. I think it's a good ode, but it's really, really different to be working on this scale where you're not like going to an archive or going for a long drive or interviewing people. Like, I guess people don't know that poets do that they actually they could interview people, you know, that they could look at an archive, that they could do historic research, but I do.
Yeah. I think for me, it was kind of like the opposite, that I needed to get out of the house. I needed to, because
I should do it. I just didn't like this.
Yeah, because most of my process was really just at the desk, and it was just none of it was there. And so when and I remember very specifically, like, you taking notes at the labor camp in Gridley, and I was just so struck by the fact that this kind of documentary poetics is both in conversation, but also kind of uh, not challenging, but it's in conversation, but also like pushing back on like the aestheticization and of like a moment, its history, its pain. And so I was really grappling with that. And so, you know, I think turning to the archives, turning to the document as a way of you know, acknowledging that we're not trying to aestheticize pain, but there is a lot of pain there. There's pain in the scars of the landscape. There's pain in, you know, the history of the water, in the history of white supremacy.
Yeah.
You know, so I guess what do you, how do you negotiate that when you see, and I guess how does that, I guess, manifest? And I've seen it, you know, in your work, and I've seen it, and I see how you do that. But I guess maybe how you conceptualize that, or how you go about mixing the journalistic documentary poetics aspect of it with, at the same time, seeing, you know, moments of beauty there.
I mean, in this Lang book, somebody who was a really good guide to me, I felt like, was Lang herself, because she had this really rich and humane way of capturing these images that had pathos, and they also had dignity, and they also had beauty. And, you know, there was a kind of way that we were invited into tenderness by her vision. And she was somebody who, she wasn't able to get her photographs very quickly. She had polio, and she had a limp. And so there was no way that she was getting these conversations with people in a quick way. And one of the things that I did when I was talking about this was I explained that I was doing this project around Dorothea Lang. And what I was really amazed by and touched by was that people across all kinds of spectrum really recognized her as an emissary of trying to do art with dignity. And they seemed to offer some trust that way. So I spent a year visiting one homeless encampment, or encampment of shelterless people in Berkeley. And I went back to a few spots in the Imperial Valley. And when I was talking to people, what I would say is, I'm doing this project around Dorothea Lang. And, you know, whether I was in a homeless encampment or a shelter or a station for migrant laborers in Imperial County, people knew about her and thought about her and thought about how she'd been there also. And one person wanted to take me to the place where this labor camp that she had, you know, tried to build and spent her 30s and 40s organizing for, and had been and then been torn down, and was like, this is the reason that there's this crisis here. There's this crisis where farm workers don't have anywhere to sleep. And so they end up sleeping in a homeless shelter. And basically, I ended up having these conversations around this relationship between migrancy and shelterlessness, and sort of the homelessness of people who can't pay rent, and the movement of people who are migrants, and but like really, really good conversations through the lens of Dorothea Lang. So that felt really important to me, that there, just to sort of think of her as a model of ethical witness, and to sort of imagine that this is something that is possible. Even though it's totally fraught, and there's also things we could point out about her where you could like, but I think also it was interesting, like there's this moment where you're sitting outside the detention center in Imperial County in Last West, and just noticing the hummingbird that came to the tuberosa plant, you know, and feeling like, how do you let these details like be in tension with each other, right? How do you notice what's beautiful and then what's scarred? And I mean, it's always possible to have blind spots and get things wrong. I mean, I think that the thing is that we have to approach this work with real humility, right? There's a big thing from the poet W.B. Yeats, which says, "Of quarrels with others, I make politics, and with quarrels with the self, I make poetry." And I think maybe the place that keeps it ethical is to be honest to the quarrels that you're having with yourself. The place that brings you into the struggle, the contradictions that you see, your uncertainty, your complicity, your, you know, and I think maybe what can harden things off is if you approach a work of art like, you know, and you're 100% sure what's right and what's wrong. And I think the poem sort of grows open to those funny details that tug at each other when you're sort of sitting in that confusion and in that quarrel with yourself. I think that's like an aesthetically and ethically rich place.
Yeah, I really love how you phrase that. Dignity and beauty, invited into tenderness, and then, you know, how people through those conversations offer trust, and using that as a model of, as you say, of ethical witness. I really like that, and I really like focusing on that dignity aspect of it. And I guess, you know, the ethical thing is to be in the field and having these conversations and meeting the people, hearing their stories, hearing what they have to say, instead of doing, you know, most of the legwork behind a desk, which, not, you know, that sounds pejorative to like desk work, but you know, I think, again, going back to that, I think that's one of the lessons that I have learned from our relatively brief friendship, you know, and, you know, being observant. There's just, I think one of the biggest concerns of Last West is this parallel between the past and the present, and just how eerily similar, and how little has changed. You know, the language might have changed, but the rhetoric is still the same.
I love that. That's a really good way to put it. The language has changed, but the rhetoric is the same. That was really, anyway, I interrupted you. Go on.
No. I mean, you know, that's just really just pointing out what I see in your work, and then also like with the poem that you read about the shooting, which I just like logged onto Twitter and saw there was like another recent one. It just feels like this endless loop, and so we just have to see it we have to see it a different way, and then we keep presenting it. And I think that's just, I don't know, that's kind of our role as poets. Somebody commented posted in the comments how they loved the specificity of like the descriptions of the locales, you know, including the plants. And I have just barely started getting into only through an app that I found out. You like take a picture of a plant and then it tells you like what it is, and it tells you like how to grow it, and like poems written about that plant or includes. And then it's been like this life like altering reality changing moment, because suddenly I get to see like, oh, that when you said, you know, coyote brush and chaparral, having recently been in the field and then like seeing it and witnessing it, putting a name to it is so different. I guess that is a long way of saying you know, I'm thinking of Robert Hass's book Field Guide, and you know, including other plants, and how just particularly like West Coast, that is, uh, to all of your poems. I don't know where I'm going with this, other than to say that I really like the specificity of the foliage, you know, of California. I've never considered myself as a California poet, I think only until recently. And then, you know, serving on that panel with you, moderating about like, was it Left Coast Poetics?
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you see yourself like in that conversation? You know, that's all to say. What is your favorite plant? What is your favorite plant to look at?
So we moved to a house that has 2 redwood trees in the backyard. And there's a stream that's buried under the house that's like just buried because that's what you do to make a suburb. But the 2 trees have this friendship, obviously, with their roots. And so they're more successful than just kind of random one tree. And they're also really successful because they're tapping deep into this river that it's buried, but you can hear it, especially in the winter. Like the gutter just picks up and there's this river sound right by your house. And I have this like funny fantasy of buying the house next door and knocking it down and like bringing the river up. And that's not going to happen, but like I think about this stream all the time. But also just to live with a redwood is pretty amazing. Like I found that I could be angry a lot during the Trump administration. And I wasn't angry when I would be looking at the tree. Or that I could be really sad during this pandemic time, and that I wasn't something about this majestic, big, patient thing that's, you know, a baby in redwood time, but is like so thick. And then seeing all of the things that want to live in it, like different birds and squirrels, and just hearing the kind of rustle of it go to sleep, and then how it wakes up in the morning and all these things leave from it. And it collects fog, and then the trunk blackens down, and then it will like kind of dry up again. And when the sunset comes and it's facing the tree turns red. And like just not brown red, but like bright red. And you're like, oh, redwood, because of this incredible color. And I just love that this life form right next to me has this existence on a totally different scale. Like it doesn't need to do the things that I need to do. It does different things. It's living for a really long time if we're lucky. It has a different world. It looks over, has a totally different perspective. And somehow I think that that's partly, you know, plants offer that. You know, once you start to name it and you get into its world, it's like the lives of plants are really, really endlessly fascinating to me. And they affirm, you know, that like that our own lives can be tended well or less well. Our own lives can have more or less life living on them, that we can be sturdier or less sturdy. You know, we can actually learn a lot. But I also think, like, I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in California, and the East Coast felt strange to me. And before the internet, when I went to college, just at the cusp of the internet. It didn't feel like this sort of unified culture. It felt like the East Coast was really different. And the Bay Area of California has this really dramatic history that's kind of sideways to the US history. And it's partly part of it and it's partly outside of it. It's partly, a Spanish history and Mexican history. And, that redwood that I was talking about in my backyard has been part of the Ohlone Nation, colonial Spain, Mexico, and California. That's just 200 years. And so to live in a place that has this kind of specificity, like I'm sitting here in a fog bank because I live in this place that's like deep water currents coming down from Alaska. To honor that specificity, that all of that is telling you something about your history, where you are on the earth, the larger geologic histories, the social history of your place, that stuff fascinates me. And it also feels like it's also the place where we get into like our empathy, our stories, our language, our connectedness. So like being able to name what's in your backyard or name the history of your backyard is just a way of being like intimate with your life. So yeah, I mean, all that to say, lots of plants. Lots of plants are my favorite plants.
I am so glad that this was recorded because I could just listen to that. You could go on for that forever. Wow, that's beautiful. I mean, what do I say to that? I think I'm really, really trying hard to avoid becoming, I don't know if this is the word, but like a fungophile, obsessed with funguses.
Are you into mushrooms these days?
No, I'm not, but I know it will become a new obsession if I just push it a little bit further. As you were talking, I was just remembering, and this is the bulk of my knowledge of fungus comes from just like 1 or 2 documentaries that I just recently saw on Netflix.
Are you watching fungus documentaries? Is that how your pandemic is going now?
Yeah, I mean, most of it has been true crime, and literally name a true crime investigation.
True crime and fungus documentaries.
And I will tell you everything about it. There's something to be said about that, though, that I was talking to a friend of mine. But like that, it was talking about how the parent tree that has sent out its saplings, if some of the saplings are starting to like wither and die, it will use the rhizomatic network of fungus, and will use the fungus to send it nutrients to keep it alive. And so like trees in like a grove usually thrive better because it's a communal effort to keep each other alive, all connected through the fungus, and sending each other nutrients when like one is faltering. And I just thought that was like wild. Like it just blew my mind.
We're having this conversation in fungus. It's
yes.
So interesting. They're healing. They really are. They're sending out tendrils to each other. And I just had the opportunity to read at Yosemite at Parsons Lodge at the Tuolumne Meadows Poetry Festival. And it was the first and only in-person reading I've given in over a year and a half. I have never read this book in front of actual people that like breathed and swiveled in their chairs. I mean, I hope you're out there breathing and swiveling in your chair.
I am.
But what happened was we all read and people were joyful to be in community with one another. And then people sort of sighed and laughed, and I sighed and laughed. And then afterwards we talked to each other. But I really felt that when we're in person together, we are, with our faces showing, we are sending out these different kinds of signals to one another, and that those signals can be so stabilizing to us, to like let us know that we are okay in the world and that we're like able to care for one another. And I think that this time has been so challenging, and I know there's lots of really good things that have happened with Zoom, with people finding each other maybe in ways that they couldn't. But I really want to affirm the fact that like poetry is about sharing breath, and then you give the reading and other people breathe back, and and then you make a joke and people laugh, and and that we're doing that work also, that we have these networks that we're building that are, I'm sure that it's like root hairs that are going out in all directions and we just don't see, but we do that for each other as well, like supporting one another and helping one another stabilize. And that will be our big work. That will be our really big work once, as soon as we can be together, and in all the ways that we can be together. That's what's ahead, I think, for us to figure out how to do that work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just those synapses that that I mean we really really thrive off of, and I mean it's literally just a replica of like the synapses that happen in our brain. I mean it's I love that the Redwood was your entity. These just majestic creatures. For me, I was recently talking about the red bud.
So
and,
beautiful.
yeah, and you said, being intimate with the plants in your own backyard and knowing them grounds you in not only the social history of plants, like you say. This redwood in your backyard has been part of this legacy of land grabs of so many things, and yet it's still there. I'm thinking of like those bristlecone pines up in the High Sierra that are 4,000, 5,000 years old, and just how slowly they grow. Sue had commented again, that these redwoods taught her to the value of standing still. And that reminds me of this article on Dame Judi Dench, who said that she is dedicating her time now to with this like tiny little microphone, listening to water travel through trees. that's like what she spends. That's like the dream. There's just like this picture of her with like this little trumpet looking thing, just listening to water rise up through trees. And it's just, I don't know, it's just endlessly fascinating, and I could just talk about plants all day with you. I guess in the few minutes we have left, I want to maybe just talk about what advice you might have for writers maybe in the audience who are working, on their own work, maybe just starting out. Maybe they've been writing for years and they're honing their craft. But it's a difficult time to be writing. It's a difficult time to be an artist. For many years we haven't had something like the WPA, as Dorothea Lang had. I mean, we have the NEA, but that's something very, very different, right?
There's actually a bill right now in California to reintroduce the Federal Writers Project.
Really?
And there's a bunch of people that are working to be part of making the arts piece of the repair, to talk about art as a kind of social infrastructure that joins people together, and can be really, really fruitful in healing situations that maybe other things can't heal.
Wow.
Art has really, really good health outcomes. Investment in art has really good economic outcomes. There's lots and lots of ways that to talk about it that are really, pencil out very well. But there's also just the idea of what would it be like? What could an artist do in a community? Could they do an oral history project of COVID? Could they do an oral history project of, a community whose language might be threatened? Could they do an oral history project of a town that, would love to have some of its memories recorded? Could they do some really interesting reporting? So if that kind of thing interests you, it doesn't have to only be the 1930s. It could be now.
Yeah.
That's really something that's worth knowing about, is that, seeding artists and community can be one of these ways that we can actually revitalize places that need revitalization. And it could have all kinds of outsourcing, tendrils that aren't necessarily what you'd expect, that are just about, ideas and community and people coming together and in new ways and new stories getting told. So I really believe in that effort. And if you're at all interested, you should look me up. And I would.
Oh yeah, we'll talk.
Yeah,
we'll talk afterwards. And yeah, it's
advice for writers though. Let me just say, I have like just 4 pieces of advice. One is read lots. The other is write lots. The third is memorize things. Something you love, try now and then to commit it to memory, because that is something that you can work on in line at the DMV, that you will come back up for you, that also will teach you things in your body in a way that you don't know, that, you know, like just to have a very beautiful poem or 2 in your back pocket will keep you company and nourish you, but it'll also shape your writing. And the last thing is find some community. This is an amazing time. I offer classes on Zoom. I know Marcelo does. I do this private workshop that people just come to because they want to like have a chance to practice poetry. But there's so many great community art centers that are like Hugo House in Seattle or the University of Arizona Poetry Center. And the thing is, you don't have to be in Arizona or Seattle anymore. You can take a class and just put aside a little portion of your life to just nourishing your art practice and see what happens when you do that. It's like, you know, one class, one effort to be in community, and see how that helps or changes, just because we're all working alone. I mean, I will raise my hand and say these are lonely days. And they're like, yeah. And they're days where you just kind of feel like you're working through fog, or is there going to be a world anymore? And the moments that I feel good are the moments when I'm making art with people and talking about art with people. And that is when I realize that the role of art on the planet is very long, and it will go through this time and it will go out to the other side, and that we are carrying stories forward, and that we have work to do with our art. And I mean that every single one of you who wants to be writing has that work to do. And it is really important and good work. And so just like affirm yourself in that search. Should I read the poem about the redwood as a way to say goodbye?
Yes, please.
Okay. Let me find it. It's here. Obad with Redwood. If we were to go, if the house fell in an earthquake, if fire, and we were burned out, I imagine the redwood in what we call our backyard would keep living. I call myself I, but below its bigness am small, I and animal near forest fractal. Look, the gash in its bark thickens to heal on our neighbor's fence. Look, the green hummingbirds take us as neighbors. Thank you.
Oh, Tess, that was beautiful. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed this conversation. I am gonna go talk to some trees.
Yay! Right. Everyone go talk to a tree, write a poem, read a poem, and take good faith. You know, be of good faith.
Be of good faith. Be observant. Tess, I can't thank you enough for joining us, and we are very, very incredibly lucky to have you. Thank you so much, and yeah, I can't wait to just read more what you're working on next with this pile of materials that you say you have piling up. So we will talk, of course, later. And thank you all again for joining. This will stay recorded and will be available as well on the YubaSutterArts website, as well as on the Facebook page. Please feel free to reach out to Tess. She is an incredible teacher. As she mentioned, she teaches these workshops, these poetry workshops, creative writing workshops. Please feel free to reach out. Her contact info is on her website. So
and I really do answer those emails if you go onto my website, or I'm also at Tessathon on Instagram or Twitter. And I like I love to bring people into conversation. As long as you don't sound like you're trying to sell me something crazy, I will answer your email. Like I will.
Yeah, I love that. I love that handle. Tessathon, at Tessathon.
Yeah.
Tess, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Marcelo. Really good to see you. And everyone who was here, thank you for being here.
Thank you.